what you do now is for the next generation or the generation beyond. It's not necessarily for you. Right? So it needs that dedication, that change in thinking. Right? It's, even if we find a solution, the benefits may only be seen in 30, 50, 100 years. So it's that investment into the future where you may not have a benefit from, but it's about that next generation. So what I'd like to draw attention to is those different components, as I was just briefly talking about. So the trees, we'll see the understory, we see the components on the ground, the forest floor, and those different parts of a forest system. And that, emphasizing the word system because everything is connected and everything depends on each other. Soil, I personally, and based on the studies I have done, I'll really see as a critical component because it is the nutrient reservoir for where plants depend upon. It's a tremendous habitat for millions and millions of species, which unfortunately many of them we can't see, especially when we're talking about fungi, when we're talking about microorganisms. But there are also more visible ones, which different invertebrates and beetles, which help us to break organic matter down and then make it available to the smaller components like the microorganisms. But as part of that, it is the breakdown of organic matter like the leaves and also the roots, and then the subsequent release of nutrients, which is fundamental for the plants to survive, besides needing sunlight and CO2 to really turn those inorganic components into the beautiful leaves we are seeing in the canopy.
That is where we're looking at exactly what these ecosystems look like right now. So the Kauri ecosystems and the myrtle ecosystems. As I said, we understand quite a bit about them, but there are also some very large gaps in our knowledge. And this is trying to understand those baselines and kind of set what the current state is now, so that in the future, when many of these long-term impacts occur, because of course the impacts can occur over many decades or hundreds of years. These might take quite a long time before we see the full implications of these diseases. So if we measure what we have now to understand in 10 years' time when we look back and we can see the changes that have occurred. And when I say the changes, by the way, it's important also to mention that we're not just talking about the diseases of the impacts of the diseases, but the impacts of the things that we do to control the diseases. So also being able to help identify if any of our actions that we take to try to fight the diseases themselves might have a negative impact, or and at how they're shaping the ecosystem.
It is an absolutely fine balance. In just this scene illustrates now, if we're talking about the implication of Kauri dieback, being aware that with the dieback comes a thinning of the canopy, and we can immediately envision that changes the light regime. And that then has an influence on species coming up in the understory. Some species being supported by a different light regime, the other species may disappear because their requirement is more towards the shady side. So it's not only with modifications in the canopy, but it's also, if there is canopy thinning, there are more leaves brought to the ground. On one side you would say, oh wow, this is additional food by organisms, but is that food of the same quality as it is from a healthy tree? This is one subject which we're trying to assess as part of Ngāriki Takitaki, the risk assessment and ecosystem impacts. So in particular, when we're talking about the ecosystem impacts, and in the word we're talking about the system. Now, kauri are fundamental species of systems, or in particular kauri-dominated systems, but they're still part of it. As we're seeing, we have a lot of other species surrounding it. And now, with modifications in the health status of kauri, I think this is our main aim, to indicate and assess and to quantify what are the effects on other components of that forest. So now we're particularly looking into the ecological component, but if we're providing a larger or wider system perspective, so it is not only the ecology, but it is also, the perception, the values of visitors. How do they perceive a modified a forest where there is more light coming through, where trees have different features, a different outlook. So also the social perceptions of change, the cultural perception of change. I mean, kauri is such a fundamentally cultural important species. And also, because as we're walking here, part of the Hillary Trail, what are the economic implications? Will it be modified look of the forest attract less visitors? So the economy associated with the attractiveness here of the Waitakere Ranges, the importance. So all these aspects considered as a wider systems perspective to provide an assessment of the risks. The implications which we're seeing in those different domains, but a long-term assessment of the risks as part of providing that risk assessment of modifications and implications of kauri dieback, but also the implications of myrtle rust. Humans are part of the system. And I know this is still an ongoing debate, but we're organisms, we're a part of the system. We have been now successfully, unfortunately, affected systems with our behavior. But we always have to remind ourselves we're part of that system. We're drawing upon resources provided by systems. May it be a forest system, may it be another system. I suppose Ngāriki Takitaki is really trying, it's a new pathway to really optimize efforts from communities, from different backgrounds. I mean, coming back to assessing, the cultural implications, the social, the economic and the ecological implications.
With the social research, our plan has been from the start that we would delay our social, cultural, and economic research for the first year. And the intention behind that is because we wanted to allow time for the Te Whakahononga program to conduct its engagement and to start with its cultural work that's being led up from Mana Whenua up. And so we wanted to make sure that the work that is coming out of that program has an opportunity to influence and shape what we actually do from our Western science perspective when we look at social and cultural and economic impacts. We wanted it to be driven by the values and the issues, the questions that were identified by the different Mana Whenua groups involved and what they wanted to see out of our research.
When we start working across disciplines, there is, we all, I think, agree that there is a lot of beneficial outcomes, but the journey is a hard one, and it takes a lot of willingness, it takes openness to really listen to others, to understand, and also, that what Ngāriki Takitaki, it is about saving our iconic trees. I mean, that's the mandate. That's what we all are contributing to. But that means learning a lot, learning to work across disciplines, to understand, to learn. I mean, it also comes to learning language, which helps in understanding. Talking about the soil, the tree scale. Now here we're in a beautiful spot where we see the landscape scale. So working across scales, another challenge and opportunity, because what we may observe at this location now might be slightly different somewhere else, because all these systems come with a legacy. Coming back to humans, the Waitakere Ranges, it has been heavily logged. So now, predominantly regeneration. If we're going to Waipoa, very, very different context, which has probably an effect on the impacts of, for example, kauri dieback, because of the legacy is different.
We're really taking a strong approach on trying to establish data that can be useful in the future. So it's often we're looking at collecting data even where we may not have the ability to analyze it in the ways that we want to yet, but on the assumption that someone 10 years from now will thank us for having collected that data. And also in collecting data that is maybe a bit different from how Western science has approached doing it in the past, that by working with Te Whakahononga, the idea is to identify the signs throughout the Maramataka that different mana whenua groups would use to identify how they would characterize what a healthy forest looks like. And then trying to figure out how we can recreate that as Western scientists. What data can we capture that would support them to make those assessments, and to have somebody 10 years in the future to look back and actually have a point of comparison. So as others have talked about with capturing the sights and sounds, but similar concepts of how do we capture things like the experience of what being in the forest is like now, so that somebody in 10 years can come back, experience the forest for themselves, and compare that to the experiences that we've recorded, and be able to see qualitatively and experientially how that has changed.
So when I came to New Zealand, I was very, very interested in the native forest in New Zealand. Recognizing that I had to learn a lot, and I'm still learning, because the species composition of forests here is so different. The basic ecology remains, but there are a lot of aspects to New Zealand forests which are very, very different to forests I have been growing up with or got to know over time. At the University of Auckland, so I'm teaching, so it's also, I feel it very, very critical to bring in young people, and I'm really calling upon students, Maori students, to help us on this journey. So that's part of our theme. We really argued for a strong cohort of students, so PhD students, master students. Now we have a great team ready to start the work, and bringing and learning together, which I think is as important as the particular outcomes we have to deliver upon as Ngārago Taketake. I want to acknowledge Nick Waipara's tremendous support over the time, because he was one of the first people I got to know, and he also was talking about the dieback, about the implications. So we started about almost 10 years ago with a master student, trying to understand the implications of the dieback. Also, introducing me to potential collaborators when we're talking here about the Waitakere Ranges, Te Kauri Amaki, which has been fantastic. And also Waitangi Wood was her insight and driving Te Whakahononga, which we're heavily engaged with, where we really want to build up and align the indigenous pathway to improve our understanding and assess the impacts and assess the risks. As I've been working with Nick for such a long time, with different angles and his continuous support and interest, in particular looking into those systems understanding, has just been very motivating. And now also to help learning understanding a different worldview. It is the interest of the next generation to get as passionate and as enthusiastic about it. So that's why the teaching component is also very important, and arguing for bringing in students to help us on this journey. Being hopeful that whatever my contribution can be helps to an understanding, helps to increase awareness, and hopefully helps to saving some of our iconic trees. And the curiosity, right? It is, it's not that we're starting at point zero. We already know a lot. With the program, there is hope, right? I suppose together, because systems are dynamic. There might be resilience, there might be resistance in the species, which other people have been looking into. There might be combinations of natural products which may help. There might be techniques which have been explored from a healing perspective. And that's again why community should engage, because of their knowledge of systems and how healing can be done, or how health can be improved. And communities living more closely to those magnificent forests, they will feel the impact first. Kauri dieback, it's said, it is the sense of loss. Now, why don't we call it, the emphasis on kauri protection, saving our iconic trees, kauri aura? So, but it comes back to values and the affinity and what you draw upon and what gets us up in the morning, right? Just also for us, because at the end it is, healthy forests, healthy people, healthy soils, healthy people. So it's really that fundamental.